Hello and welcome to Ed Talks with Khan Academy. I'm Kristen DiCerbo, the Chief Learning Officer at Khan Academy, and today I am looking forward to talking to Dr. Ted Coe, who is with NWEA, one of our key partners here. He is the Director of Content Advocacy and Design. We're looking forward to talking about math and math learning today. Before we get started, I want to remind you that Khan Academy is a nonprofit organization and relies on donations from folks like you to help us continue to be able to do our work. So if you go to khanacademy.org/donate, you will find a place where you can help keep us supported and work in continuing our work. So thank you for that. I also want to acknowledge our corporate supporters who have come and helped us work through the COVID-19 crisis, including AT&T, General Motors, and Fastly. If you would like to listen to this conversation or any of our previous conversations, you can, wherever you get your podcasts, find Homeroom with Sal, the podcast, and you'll be able to listen wherever you prefer, at the gym, on your walks, doing the dishes. We hope you enjoy it. So before we get, without further ado, let me introduce Dr. Ted Coe. So he has over 25 years of experience as a teacher, professor, department chair, administrator, and a nonprofit director, basically weaving together perspectives about mathematics education. He has experience as a full-time high school mathematics teacher, a community college faculty member, a mathematics chair at 2 community colleges, and an assistant dean at the university level. And I will say, as someone who is a graduate of Arizona State University, he is a fellow Sun Devil as well. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Glad to be here.
We are glad to have you. So first of all, tell us what your role is specifically. What do you do at NWEA?
This is an interesting question, right? The answer is, the title is Director of Content Advocacy and Design for Mathematics. And the interesting side to it is well, I get to advocate for content. And so for many ways, for me, it's like this dream world to be in, where I get to kind of imagine the kinds of things that we want to work on. How do we want to grow? How do we want to move beyond a focus on assessment to teaching and learning and getting into the classroom, and getting it. So it's envisioning these kinds of things. It's being able to work with different states and districts and get in there and roll up our sleeves and get our hands dirty, trying to solve some pretty messy problems. So that's a lot. That's a lot of what I get to do. And so to me, it's just it's great fun.
That's fantastic. How did you come to be in this role? What was your path that you took to end up here?
It was so bizarre. It's a crazy path, career path. People, and started out as a high school teacher. Things were going well. I loved high school teaching. Highlighted the career, right? Then I ended up getting pulled over to one of the community colleges, and I actually walked right in. My first job in the community college system was as a chair at Rio Salado College in the Maricopa Community College District. So it was like this big sort of leap. I ended up switching over to another community college in the district, Scottsdale, and while I was there, I ended up being involved deeply in the mathematics around the whole community college system, and kind of involved in the articulation conversations around the state and everything. And somewhere along that time, the PARC consortia came along. And you might remember this was in the early years of the Common Core, and there were the 2 major consortia, PARC and Smarter Balanced. And I was brought on to the PARC side of the conversation. Arizona was one of the governing states at the time, and I was brought in as one of the higher ed content experts. And so I was dropped into this space all of a sudden, where I'd been a college professor and high school teacher, and now I was in this space where it's like, we want your input on this multi-state assessment that's on these new standards. And so I'm like, well, let's read the standards. Let's see what this is about. And I got really involved in it. And so much, in fact, that eventually PARC split off of the group that was running it, which was called Achieve. And Achieve was, the ones for the American Diploma Project, helped lead the Common Core and all that, and the Next Generation Science Standards. And so they hired me to be their math director. And so for the years prior to coming into this space at NWEA, where I've been for 2 years, I was the director of mathematics there, and got to work all around the country with great folks everywhere, and really get to see how the policies are worked out and the difficulties that people are encountering, and trying to talk through some of those things and getting the chance to speak all over the. It was great fun. It's been great fun, and it's just been one surprise after the other, and here I am today.
Fantastic. That sounds great. So let's talk a little bit about teaching and learning math. Historically, there's been all this discussion about should we teach procedural skills? Should we teach conceptual understanding? And there's these wars about which one is more important and where those is. Is that the right conversation to be having?
It's a tale as old as time, at least as old as my career has been, right? That there's always this tension in there. And so, I've had to sit back and think to myself, how would I describe teaching and learning mathematics after my 20 years of teaching? And, I was like, well, how do I sum this up? It was something I developed along the way, but it was just this idea that, look, part of what we do in mathematics is we teach these ways of doing, but we want you to be able to do those, but we also want to make sure that you're picking up ways of thinking. And I'll give you an example of that in just a moment, that go alongside habits of thinking. So you have these ways of thinking sort of at a core that are bolstered by these habits of thinking that are then in turn really sort of brought, they come to the table in certain ways through the ways of doing that allow you to go on and do something bigger with the mathematics. An example I use quite frequently is with this idea of ways of thinking. And I can ask a room full of adults this question. And basically I say something like, hey, how many years was it from December 7th, 1941 to December 7th, 2014? That's how long I've been using this question. Okay, so December 7th, 2014.
Right.
And you by and large, you ask this to a room full of even adults, right? And people will sit there and they start chewing on an answer, and they start, oh, what can I do? What can I do? And they go through some mechanizations in their head, and they might think, well, that's actually kind of a subtraction problem, but I don't really need to use subtraction to get it, because in this case, I'm just trying to find this additive comparison and this gap, if you will, between the two numbers. And there are different ways to do it. Maybe I want to go from 1941 to 2000, cut it off, and then go from 2000 to 2014. Or maybe I want to take the whole thing, instead of starting at 1941, I want to slide the whole thing back a year and start at 1940. Either way, all of these things are fair. But the majority of the folks I ask that question to, they don't answer it with the way of doing. They don't do the 15 steps of setting up the algorithm, borrowing, not giving back, all that kind of thing, putting the one. They don't do that. They bring ways of thinking to bear, right? And I think I think maybe part of why we get into this mess is in the standards we have the learning progressions, and the learning progressions end with the ways of doing. And so it looks like the way of doing is the goal, but the way of doing is just one more thing. It's just one more piece, right?
Got it.
So I really like to emphasize this idea of ways of thinking with regards to ways of thinking, ways of doing, habits of thinking, all of those things working together. Because if you have just one, the ways of doing, all you've got is a box of puzzle pieces, when you're done with it. Yeah.
Right. So I'm going to keep going with the year example here to push on this. So my sister got married in 1997, and I have to say, somehow never made this connection, but she said to me one day, if you want to know how long we've been married, just take what current year it is and add 3, because we 1997 to 2003. And then I was like, oh yeah, why did I not think of that? But so that's a way of doing it. So then that's one way how does that relate then to ways of thinking? And so are there many different ways you can do it and the ways of thinking around it?
Yes. The idea is that when I ask that question, there are so many different ways you could approach it.
Right.
You could approach it with a way of doing, and no harm, no foul. You could approach it with ways of thinking. But if all you have is the way of doing and you don't have those ways of thinking, then when you get to somewhere in real life, it doesn't illuminate. And a place where this happens is you can ask like where in real life, ask this to an adult, where in real life have you ever actually used division of fractions? And I'll be surprised if you actually get any valid answer back from anybody. Right. And why is that? Because if we reflect back to it, when we were taught the division of fractions, those of us who are of a certain age, right? We were taught a way of doing, and it was connected. It was totally disconnected from ways of thinking, grounded in what
Yes.
does it mean to divide.
Right.
So
Right. You
it's
just,
that.
yes, you were just taught the procedure. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Of
And
what to
so
do.
when
Yeah.
you've got the procedure, but you have no place to hang it when it comes and shows up
Right.
in real life.
Right. Right. That totally makes sense. So if I'm a teacher, how do I start thinking about encouraging these ways of thinking?
See, that's the tricky part, right? So,
Right?
yeah, right. And so, I, one really cool thing that happened in the last couple of years, Peter Liljedahl came out with a book called Building Thinking Classrooms. And I'm like, yes, yes, we're seeing this emphasis shifting to thinking. Fantastic. Because at the same time, my colleagues and I at NWEA have been trying to work on this idea of how can we get ways of thinking moving and talked about in classrooms in ways that are non-threatening, right? That feel safe
Right.
to both
Right.
teachers and students, because there's awkwardness when we ask ourselves thinking questions. All of us have to stop and think, and with thinking comes vulnerability, right?
Right.
So
Right.
what we built, we actually built out some things called these formative conversation starters, and the role of the formative conversation starters is to basically help shape how you might enter into some of these kinds of conversations that are designed to focus on ways of thinking, uh, and then to do it in such a way that you also know what it is you're trying to listen for at the same time. So we've got these bins, these big ideas to nurture sense making. And then we've got clusters of questions that unfold as you ask them and might lead to moments of cognitive dissonance, or might lead to ahas, or might lead to places where you kind of step back and go, I really do need to think more deeply about that. So there are different options of to do it. You can put in classroom routines. You can build tools, like we're trying to build out. Uh, but the idea is what can we do to do that? All kinds of things. Like Peter's got in his book, all kinds of options, as well as what I'm offering here today.
Yeah, so I like this idea of conversation starters. I think we're putting a link to them in the
Great.
chat for folks that are following along. Can you give us some examples? What are some examples of what these are and how do they work?
Yeah, yeah. So and I sometimes the idea, like with fractions, I might come out and we might start with a question like, well, what's a fraction? And then well, the next question might be, well, is a fraction one number or two numbers? And just sit back and talk about it. Talk about what you think on that, right? And then, well, what do you think of when you think of 3/8? Okay, what do you think of when you see 8/3? Because if you're thinking of 3/8 as 3 out of 8, then 8/3 becomes something that's maybe a little tougher to think about. Another example would be a question that starts off with like, well, what does division do for us? And so you want to sit back and you think about, well, what does division do for us? And then the next question would be not to do a division problem, but to ask a question like, how can you think about, without computing, how can you think about a problem like 10 divided by 1/2? And to be able to go on to the next one, well, then how would you think about -10 divided by 1/2? Right? And if your ways of thinking are consistent and robust, then you'll be able your answers were sort of gelled together. But if you have fractures, and if they're disjoint, then you kind of have to go back and kind of try to figure out, well, how do I get I know that my thinking should gel together with my answers to all of these things. What do I need to do? How do I need to accommodate the way I'm thinking in order to make these things work? From the teacher's perspective, we help provide what you might be listening for in these
I was
free
just going to
things.
ask
Just go
that.
down real quick. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
what are the things that you're looking for from the teacher's perspective?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
So like we know that we want fractions. We want students to be able to think of a fraction as a single number, as a point on the number line, right? But if I'm
right,
talking
right,
about, if I ask my students about fractions and they're saying, well, we're only thinking of it as two numbers, then I'm talking about something as the teacher that's completely different from what they're hearing. And
Right.
so it's this idea of getting these meanings out in the open so that we all know that we're talking about the same thing. So when I say fraction, you're thinking the same thing. Or when I talk about division, you've got a notion of thinking of it as a multiplicative comparison. Or you've got ways of thinking about it in terms of how many copies of one thing are in another, or this thing is this times as large as this thing, right? Which when you have those ways of thinking, then a question like how can you think of 10 divided by 1/2 doesn't become something that's out of bounds at all. It becomes something that you can already hang onto one of those previous existing meanings of division if they're there, if you've got those ways of thinking.
Right, right. Yeah, that makes sense. So do these starters work across ages and grade levels? Are there things that we need to be, what kinds of things can younger
Well,
kids do and what kinds of things can older kids start to get
the,
on?
so the interesting thing about them is the way if you go down, and maybe some people have already gone and downloaded the documents just while we're sitting here, but you'll see the entry point into this is through an item, it's through a standard. But the idea is we've spent so many years unpacking standards, digging in and saying, let's look at this one standard. What we want to do is say, we're only using this as the entry point. Because what we want to do is we want to find out what is all of the other mathematics that has to come in alongside it to help get through this. We tend to look at an item, go, this is the standard. And then we say, well, if they get it wrong, then we want to go back and go to that nearest connecting standard. What we're saying here is actually, maybe you want to go ask them about what's a fraction.
Right,
so,
right.
so let's go talk about what a fraction is. It might not be the nearest neighbor standard that's the issue. It could be some ways of thinking that endure. And that goes back to your question about who are these for? Well, you can take the ones that we've got packaged in the 3rd grade and ask them to 7th and 8th graders because the ways of thinking are enduring. Right. And so the ideas are, yes, they grow a little bit, but they endure, and they grew out of these things, actually grew out of are thinking about what could we help to provide teachers with as we move into this phase now where students are coming with such uneven opportunities to learn. And philosophically, I have to say, well, I can't just be focused on ways of doing. I have to be focusing some way on the ways of thinking and these habits of thinking that come alongside it. And so what could we do? That's where we ended up with this. So if you are a 3rd grade teacher, you could probably pull stuff from the 4th and 5th grade. If you're a high school teacher, you can pull things from any grades, right? And they'll still be fair game because they're things to talk about, ideas that endure, that go on and on. So if you're in high school, you might dig into the functions, you might dig into comparison, you might dig into operations. I hope you dig into proportional relationships.
Yeah, yes. So this whole conversation is making me think about something that we talk a lot about at Khan Academy, which is what Sal used to call Swiss cheese gaps, but now everyone calls unfinished learning, which is the idea that lots of folks didn't get some of those foundational concepts when they were first presented. And so try to then build the next level without those concepts, which is kind of a shaky foundation, and it just keeps going. So it sounds like these conversation starters are starting to think about almost diagnosing in some ways, like, do you have those
do you have the ways of thinking, right? The foundational ways of thinking, which are, when you look at your state standards, you're going to see them kind of in there, but you might not see them as explicit as we're trying to call them out here. Like these are some core ones that you want to keep coming back to. You want to keep revisiting these and keep listening. And so the kinds of questions that we're putting out here, use them however you want to use them. Use them full class, use them one-on-one, use them in small groups, use them for turn and talks. You can do all kinds. But the idea is to sit back and listen. And it's also what we would point out is it's not intended to, there will be a teachable moment. It's not during this time, because we want to set up the culture in such a way that this is free. Open up, tell me what you're thinking. And it's not to correct, it's to listen. And what's interesting about that, right, is if you keep asking more questions, you might realize that your first thoughts about what people like to call misconceptions could be completely wrong, that you've misconceived their misconceptions. I don't like using the word misconceptions because the students have the conceptions, and this is all about what conceptions might they have, right? Not what don't they have, what conceptions might they have? How are they thinking about these things? let's build from that. That connects back very closely to Sal's house building analogy,
Yeah.
right?
Right. Right.
These are these foundational. They're more like it's more like these foundational threads that wind their way all the way through,
Right.
not just on the bottom floor, but
Yes.
you
Yes.
just keep continue to strengthen them like the trunk of a tree, right? It just keeps
Right.
getting
Right.
stronger and stronger. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. That totally makes sense. How do you think about the idea of mastery in this world? We talk a lot about mastery learning here, and thinking it's easy when you're talking about skills and having mastery of skills, but mastery of some of these things is somewhat different. Is that even a valid concept? I don't know.
Yeah, it's so hard to say what is mastery. I mean, we always want to draw everybody. We always want to draw a line for proficiency somewhere, right? What it
Right.
means
Right.
to have learned
Yes.
something. But
Right.
in this mindset, on the ways of thinking, it's like these are things that continue to grow and change, morph and evolve. And as I think about, well, how do we ever establish whether students have mastered this? I'm not sure that that's even the right type of question, but
Yeah.
rather
Yeah.
just like it's just to keep on how's that schema building up in their minds as they continue to go, and how
Right.
can I leverage that to go on to that next place?
Right, right. You can think about how you would expect some of these answers to change as you learn new things. You're
Yeah.
changing your ideas about what these are as you kind of move up through new skills and things you're developing. Interesting. So we obviously do a lot with technology, but we also want to think about how teachers and technology work together. And so I'm interested in your thoughts about, the interplay between the two. As I think about what you're talking about, technology is never going to be good at doing what you're talking about. That's like the thing that teachers need to be in classrooms. So I'm
Yeah.
interested in your thoughts about how teachers and technology can work together to build
And
on these
that's where,
ideas.
yeah. So I'm happy to hear you see it that way, because that's how I see it too, right?
Right.
It's that idea that that the computers, they're really good at helping with that way of doing things, right? The ways of doing,
Right.
but to sort of put these complex ways of thinking together, I mean, that takes some time and working and developing, and I just to me, I see a very human side to
Yeah.
that it would be very hard to capture with a computer system. So each can play a very important role, right? So the computers provide an heretofore seen access to content in ways that we've never seen before, right? And so building that up, but that next task is, well, how do we take that access that we've now shared, but how do we build in these kinds of things? What can we have the computers help to support us with when it comes to engaging in these kinds of conversations that will be able to help sort of listen to students and figure out exactly sort of what might the next move be based on ways of thinking, not necessarily just the ways of doing, as you might see pointed out in standards mappings, that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So another piece that we try to encourage is helping students become owners of their own learning and thinking about developing those metacognitive skills, being
Yeah.
able to understand what they know and evaluate what they understand and need to learn, and how those fit in. I'm interested in how you think about that in some of this framework too.
Yeah, well, that might land in that habits space, right? Being able to
Yeah,
reflect on being honest with myself. Am I making sense? Am I in my own mind? Can I justify what I'm saying? Can I put or am I just
right.
spouting things off? So maybe part of that is that you can with this type of approach, you really do get the opportunity for the student to reflect. It's by not correcting right away, by continuing to ask questions, you're providing the student opportunities to reflect. And then maybe when it's done, and then you sit down with the student, and then you help them have some metacognitive reflection on it. What would you like to work on, or what questions did you answer that you felt like you wanted to take back or think through again or think more about or learn more about, right? To help them spot where they need ways they wanted to strengthen their ways of thinking.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that idea of helping, of thinking about Um, your confidence in your answers is something that we talk about too. Like after students give answers, having them think about, so how sure of you were that answer, and what did you know and didn't you know? And I could see them doing it with this too. So asking students, what do you think a fraction is? And then how confident
Yeah.
are you in that answer and where that fits in, would be interesting
Yeah. Yeah.
to think about. Yeah, definitely. So as you think about advising teachers on next steps, so they've had this conversation, what is the next thing they should do based on the information that they get?
Well, I think as you're listening, you're trying to interpret, right? What are you noticing? Work on those. What do you want to notice with what the student's saying? Reflect back on it. If you some of them in the things that we're putting together around these, we've got some videos, and it's very fun to sit and watch, because you kind of get to, if you watch it 2 or 3 times, sometimes you'll get even more and more out of it. So it's kind of yeah, teachers, what could you do with these? What's the you know? I don't know. Did I get
Yeah,
that? Did I
yeah.
answer that okay? Or
Yeah, so the idea it's going to have, the teachers are going to have to do some pretty good interpretation of what they're hearing, and then think about, based on that, what are the understandings that they need to either fill in or move forward, or what that looks like. Sounds
and
like.
and 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 it's also self-reflective. I mean, when we were putting these together, they made all of us stop and think. We had to sit
Right.
there and think, oh, how would we answer this? Because
Yes, yes,
basically, it wasn't, we weren't putting questions down to get right or wrong answers. It's coming up with questions that
right,
uncover thinking. And you don't
right,
have to ask
right,
right or wrong questions to uncover thinking.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's, I think that's another piece in math education, that we're coming to better understandings of, that math education isn't just about right and wrong answers and where things are. Math does have right and wrong answers to some things, but
I'm
the,
not minimizing the need for right
yeah,
or wrong answers, right?
right,
But
right.
there's a time for that, and there's a time for listening to thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Excellent. So anything that you're excited about, I'll close on this question. Anything you're excited about in the coming couple of months that your team is working on?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So one of the things I'm working on, I just did a talk on this at South by Southwest last week, and it's
Oh,
called I called it mathematical rigor mortis: the quest for a cure. And it's this idea where where when we sit back and we think about our field, math teachers, we think about how many ways does math kill things, right? Math kills dreams, it kills joy, it kills progress. And I think and also it also kills moving policy in the right directions, and making changes at systemic levels. These things are so entrenched in the way that we do things. But I'm encouraged, and I hope that the folks out there are encouraged, that I think we're moving in the right direction to cure mathematical rigor mortis. And if you ever want to reach out and talk to me about it, I'd love to go into that as well. But that's something I'm encouraged about, is the sort of spaces and the things I'm seeing across the country to help address that.
we had a question from Angel on YouTube, who's a student and wants to know how they can stay motivated when they're doing work. We hear this a question a lot from folks who are needing to stay motivated to do their work. What do you think?
Oh, so maybe Angel, and I hope this is helpful. But if math is being presented to you as though it's the collection of puzzle pieces that you're just shaking the box and you can kind of hear them rattling, the challenge would be to know that it does make a big, beautiful picture, that all of the pieces fit together, that no piece stands alone. And that if you find that encouraging, then you can figure out how these pieces fit together. What's the story that's being told here? It's a great one. And there are lots of places where you could go to help get some support on that as well. But don't let the current situations that you might be in, or these these things that are happening all around us right now, don't let them destroy the joy that mathematics has for you. That would be my take. So
I like it. And putting together that puzzle could be a challenge, a fun
yeah,
challenge to undertake and to think through. Excellent.
yeah. But it's there.
Well,
It's ready to be put together. But it gets put together in your own head. So
fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a pleasure to talk to you, and I hope some of our folks out there dive into those conversation starters.
well, thank you. This was great.